We got our Gold Dredge 8 boarding passes. That's where we'll be heading soon. Alright, we're getting ready to start this Gold Dredge 8 tour. And of course it's raining.
I've been up there a long time. Maybe that's one. Maybe that's for ponchos. That's an old big.
Where are we going to start?
Oh, y'all sit on the inside.
You fit right in there.
Like to be a duck, I guess we found out this morning. Welcome everyone to Gold Dredge number 8 in Fox, Alaska on a little bit of a soggy summer morning here in the Goldstream Valley. My name is George Peterson and I'm going to be your narrator and guide this morning while you are with us, and we are going to spend a lot of time together. So I'll introduce myself as we get set to go here. I have been living in Alaska for 30 years, and all 30 I've been right here in Fairbanks. I live right downtown in an old log house by the Chena River. My wife and I have raised a son here. We are raising a 13-year-old daughter right now, and I really love this town of Fairbanks. I've been working on this property for 24 years. This is my 24th season here in Fox, doing what I love to do in the summertime, rain or shine. That's be outside all day, every day, in the Goldstream Valley, talking about the history of this amazing place that I live. And this 24th year at the dredge and my 30th year in Fairbanks will be my last. On May 20th, I retired from a long career teaching high school history here in Fairbanks. I am done in the classroom, and my amazing wife is done with Fairbanks winters. So we are headed south down to the sunny side of the mountains in northern Oregon, and we are on the final countdown. It's getting real now, 19 days until we hit the road, and we are out of town. So I'm enjoying every minute I get here, my last summer in Fairbanks in the Goldstream Valley. And it is a little bittersweet, but our goal here today is to make this a great trip for you, rain or shine. So we wanted to get you on this train and out of the rain as quickly as possible. And so I'm going to do things a little differently. I'm going to talk about the pipeline from right here. And then when I finish that, we are going to hit the rails and talk about gold with just a little bit of a transition. And if you have any questions about anything that I cover on this trip, pipeline or the gold mining history, you find me. I will be with you for your entire time here, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. I taught Alaska history for many, many years here in town. And so don't be afraid to find me. And once we get started here, and I guess I already have started, but once I start the tour, I am not going to stop talking. I would say for about 40 minutes, 40 to 45 minutes nonstop. And when we get to the end of this, especially you guys in the front are going to say, cannot believe that guy just talked for 40 minutes straight on a rainy train in the middle of the Goldstream Valley. But I am ready. Okay, so we are going to start this morning talking about modern Alaska and oil. And you all, on your way down to the train, walked directly underneath a small section of the Trans-Alaska pipeline system, TAPS. And that is the pipe that is moving oil 800 miles right down the center of the state of Alaska from the producing wells at Prudhoe Bay at the Arctic Ocean to our north, 800 miles down to the marine terminal at Valdez on Prince William Sound. In Valdez, Alaska, about 400 miles south of us, is the northernmost ice-free port in North America. And at the Valdez Marine Terminal, the Alaska oil that flows through that pipe is loaded onto big tanker ships and then brought to market on the west coast of the United States year-round. And as we are here today in early mid-July 2024, just about 500,000 barrels of oil a day are flowing through that pipe at 42 US gallons per barrel. The pipe itself crosses three major Alaska mountain ranges. The Brooks Range behind us to our north, the Alaska Range in front of us to the south, and then the Chugach Range on the coast down by Prince William Sound. And the oil is moved up and over those big mountains by big pumps. There are 4 big diesel-powered jet turbine pumps in operation right now moving the oil. It's moving at about 5 to 7 miles per hour, and you walked underneath a pipe that is completely full of Alaska light sweet crude. The pipe that is actually moving that oil is a 48-inch diameter, little over half-inch thick steel pipe, and on the main line, that 48-inch diameter pipe is wrapped in a thick layer of insulation, and then that metal coating that you see is clamped over that insulation to protect it from the weather, and that is why you cannot hear or feel the oil moving through that pipe as you walk underneath of it. It's underneath that layer of really, really dense foam. The company that designed, built, and maintains that pipe today is the Alyeska Pipeline Service Company. And Alyeska, today headquartered here in Fairbanks, built the pipeline between 1974 and 1977 at a cost of $8 billion US. Most expensive private construction project ever undertaken up to that point. And when Alyeska built that line, their preferred method of construction was to bury the pipe underground. Relatively simple for them to dig a big trench, do some preparation work, weld the pipe together, wrap it in insulation, and then bury it. 480 miles of that line are buried. And when you leave later on this morning, if you look to your right, as you head to the exit, you will see the pipe cuts underground right here on the Dredge 8 property. So 480 miles buried, leaving the remaining 320 miles elevated as we have right here on the property because of permafrost. Alyeska could not bury that pipe in permanently frozen ground because the pipe puts out heat. That oil comes out of the ground from deep underground, hot, up at Prudhoe Bay at about 120 degrees Fahrenheit. And even through the insulation, that oil puts out enough heat that if the pipe were buried in the permafrost, it would melt the ground all around it, ground would settle unevenly, pipe would potentially sink in, break, and cause major problems. So the pipe is elevated in permafrost conditions up on the supports that you saw when you walked down here that are called VSMs. Those are vertical support members, and there are just over 78,000 individual VSMs holding up the 320 miles of elevated pipe. And those VSMs are in place to keep the ground underneath that pipe frozen and stable all year round. And as you exit, if you take a quick or a close look at the VSMs, you can see that the pipe itself is not attached to the support. It is not tied or bolted down in any way. It's free to move. If the ground underneath that pipe shakes because of earthquake activity, that pipe will freely slide back and forth on top of that VSM. The entire pipeline above and below ground is engineered to withstand without any damage a sustained 8.4 magnitude earthquake, and there has been no damage anywhere on the line today due to earthquake activity. Now, one big question when the pipe was first proposed was how it was going to affect wildlife. A lot of concern, especially about caribou herds up more north. A lot of people that live north of the Brooks Range rely on those caribou as their grocery store, essentially. And it was a lot of fear that the pipe would interfere with migration routes. Alyeska did build several special crossings at known migration routes. Pipe elevated a little bit extra so that those animals can go under. But it's been found over the time that the pipe has been in place, has not affected the routes of the caribou. They are thriving and surviving as they have for tens of thousands of years, and their migrations continue there undisturbed. A lot of questions here about the pipeline and security. Now, 500,000 barrels of oil a day flowing through that pipe right now. Market price for Alaska Lake Sweet crude at 9 o'clock this morning, I checked, just about $83 a barrel. $83 times 500,000 barrels equals a lot of money flowing through that pipe, and it seems very open and unsecure. It is accessible along its entire length so that Alyeska can get to it for maintenance and repairs, but that pipe is very, very closely watched. Alyeska flies a helicopter at low altitude up and down that pipeline corridor every day. Ground patrol is constantly traveling the line, and then the pipe itself is monitored internally and externally with a whole variety of sensors. So Alyeska always knows in close to real time what is going on inside, outside, and all around that pipe. So that is your real quick overview of TAPS. That's the official name of the line, Trans-Alaska Pipeline System, moving Alaskan oil 800 miles from Prudhoe Bay down to Valdez. And that, in fact, on this rainy summer morning here in the Goldstream Valley was a complete 2-day unit in the Alaska history class. I taught 9th graders for many, many years. You guys got it in about 9 minutes flat this morning. And I will tell you here as we get started, there will be no test for you. But you know why? Because I am never grading another test as long as I live. Those days are done for me. Thank you. All right, so again, if you have any questions about the pipe, you want to find me when we get down to main camp, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. But now, we are ready to transition to our train ride. Welcome aboard, everyone. We are the only train riding the rails this morning, and we call this 10:30 trip the Beaver Creek or the B train. So again, we will be the only train in camp. When it's time for boarding calls, listen for Beaver Creek. Our engineer on the B train behind me in the cab is Josh. Everybody say good morning, Josh.
Good morning, Josh.
Josh has made his final check. This electric train is ready for a safe ride. Do us a favor, one more time, just check the doors on both sides. Make sure they are securely latched. Josh will give a signal with the bell or the whistle when he's ready to move the train, and that is your signal to please be safe and have a seat. No smoking on the train this morning, and please try to refrain from using cell phones for anything other than taking pictures or video while we are riding the rails. And one more thing before we go, obviously a lot of rain this morning. We try to keep the tracks as clear as we can of brush. Sometimes they get weighted down with rain. Some branches might brush the side. And also when we get started, any rain that's in the gutters is going to come out as we hit the small grades that we have on the tracks. Other than that, Josh, we are set to go on this Beaver Creek train, and we are going to take a trip through gold mining history. Up on your screens right now, picture of a man named Felix Pedro in the story of gold in the Fairbanks mining district. Where we are right now starts with the story of that man. Pedro was an Italian immigrant who made his way across country and up into the far north long before the major gold strike in the Canadian Klondike in 1896 that brought so many tens of thousands of men north. Pedro was up in the Circle mining district, 150 miles north of us on the Yukon River, all through the 1890s. And Felix Pedro was your prototypical gold prospector, a man who wanted to find his own gold. He would work for others in their mines only until he had earned enough to buy himself a grub stick. That's some bacon and beans, a sourdough, a bedroll, a pickaxe and shovel, and a gold pan. And with those limited supplies and simple tools, Felix Pedro walked into the wilderness searching for gold. He came 150 miles on foot from Circle City down into this unexplored valley, and he found his gold on July 22nd, 1902, in the creek he named after himself, Pedro Creek, 5 miles up the road from us here in Fox. And that Pedro strike started the gold rush into what would become Fairbanks. Now Pedro and the other man that came into this valley used their simple prospecting tools to look for what they called color, or an indication of gold in the creeks. And we're just about to cross rain-swollen Engineer Creek here for the first time on the property. And this is a gold-bearing creek. If a prospector found good gold in a creek like Engineer, you would know there is potentially a lot more gold somewhere close by. And in Fairbanks, that meant buried underground. Now there are 3 layers of material in the ground here that you need to understand the mining methods I'm going to talk about. The top layer of material in the ground is called overburden. It is frozen silt and mud. There is no gold in overburden. Underneath that, a layer of frozen gravel, bedrock. And if there is any gold to be found in paying quantities worth mining large scale, that gold will not be up at the surface in the creek. That gold will be right down at bedrock underneath all that frozen ground. And that layer of gold that lay across bedrock was called the pastry. So Pedro and the other men that came into the Gold Stream Valley would stake a 20-acre claim on a creek and then set up equipment. Right behind me here is what a typical gold mine looked like in Fairbanks during the peak of the gold rush. Once the miners had all their equipment in place, they would pick what they hoped was going to be a lucky spot on that claim, and they would dig an 8 by 8 foot shaft straight down through the frozen overburden and gravel all the way to bedrock, as much as 300 feet down on some of the deepest claims. And if they were lucky and they hit that pay streak of gold at bedrock, they would then start to excavate a side tunnel off of that shaft following that pay streak of gold. And that side tunnel was called a drift. So these were drift mines. The men that worked them were known as drifters because they were drifting off of the shaft following the gold. Once that shaft was opened to bedrock, the drifters would send steam lines down from the boiler on the surface, and those lines were attached to steam points like this one right here. Men working underground would hammer these points into the frozen face of the drift, use the steam that came out the end to thaw that frozen pastry. Once it was thawed, they would excavate with picks and shovels, fill up wheelbarrows, 265 pounds per load. Those men moved that thawed gold-bearing gravel from the face of the drift right across bedrock back to the bottom of the shaft. They would fill the big bucket up that was waiting there. When that bucket was full, they would signal their engineer up on the surface. At the signal, the engineer would engage his winch, lift the full bucket up and out of the shaft, and it would drop its contents into a pile of material like this behind me that's called pay dirt. Pay dirt is gold mixed in with sand and gravel. And what the drifters were looking for in the pay dirt was placer gold, P-L-A-C-E-R. placer gold is gold that has been separated from its original lode source or mother lode by natural erosive processes. Over millions of years, the gold was washed off the lode up in the hills, down into the valleys. Because of its great density, that gold sank down to bedrock, eventually froze in place, forming the pay streaks. I feel like I'm in a Motley Crue concert or something up here. Frozen in forming the pay streaks. To separate the placer gold in the pay dirt, from the sand and the gravel, the drifters needed two things: a steady supply of water from the creeks and a sluice box. Now, a sluice box was just a narrow wooden trough, usually 18 inches across, set up at a downward angle with some riffles or wooden slats inserted into it crosswise to catch gold. When we get down to the dredge, I'm going to show you a set of riffles and explain how they work as gold recovery devices. But here the drifters would build long wooden sluice boxes right into the piles of pay dirt. They would divert the creeks directly into the sluices, and they would spend all summer long shoveling the pay dirt into the sluice box to catch that heavy placer gold in those riffles. How about a hand for Paxton, our engineer, running the winch for us here this morning? That is an authentic piece of gold rush air machinery. It's a lot of work to get it moving in the wet weather. It's a lot more work to get it to stop in the wet weather. All right, so peak year for gold recovery in Fairbanks using these underground drifting methods was 1909. 1909, $11 million worth of gold recovered by the drifters. At $17 an ounce at that time, that's about 650,000 ounces of gold recovered in one cleanup season. Now, after that record 1909 year, there's a sharp decline in gold recovery, almost in half by 1910, because the easy gold was gone. The rich pay streaks were mined out. There was still a lot of gold left on the claims. All the drifters knew that gold was there, but they called it waste gold. It was the peripheries of the pay streaks, a waste of time to mine, because it cost the drifters more to get the waste gold out of the ground than it was worth. They had to move too much gravel to get too little gold. So as gold recovery declined, population went with it. By the early 1920s, Fairbanks, just another dying Alaska mining town. And what saved this town from disappearing was the dramatic shift in the early 1920s from the small-scale underground drifting methods to large-scale mechanized and corporate financed mining. And the large-scale method we're going to talk about here was the use of the big gold dredges. Now, the company that owned and operated the dredges here was the Fairbanks Exploration Company. We call them FE. FE came into town in the early 20s, and the first thing that company did was test the ground for gold. They drilled thousands of holes across claims. They took core samples right to bedrock, determined enough waste gold present to make a profit if the claims were worked on a large scale. And FE began preparations to do that by acquiring over 34,000 acres of gold claims here in Fairbanks. And once they controlled that ground, FE began infrastructure work. They had to have two things in place to dredge this ground: power and water. Now, FE needed power because all 8 dredges in their fleet were electrically driven machines. To power the big electric dredges, FE built their own power plant downtown Fairbanks, sent 2,300 volts of electricity out to all 8 gold dredges. To get the huge amount of water required for dredging, FE could not rely on local creeks, so they built their own water supply called the Davidson Ditch, and that ditch is up on your screens right now. Davidson Ditch, a series of open trenches and big pipes that moved an entire branch of the Chattanooga River 90 miles and deposited millions of gallons of river water every day here in the Gold Stream Valley. Now, once they had water and power, FE could turn to ground preparation work to get ready for dredging. And that was a two-step process that went right along with the layers of material in the ground that I talked about. That top layer of overburden, again, just frozen silt and mud. No gold in it, so all overburden had to be removed before ground could be dredged. And FE removed overburden with big water cannons like this one back here called hydraulic giants. FE was taking water off of the Davidson Ditch through a series of pipes, forcing it out the giant at high pressure. Workers called pipers would hold onto the giant they were operating, point it straight ahead, and use that high pressure water to just blast away the overburden. Layer by layer, wash it into the creeks, and let the creeks just carry it away. If I were standing on this claim on Engineer Creek before the FE company stripped this ground of overburden, I would be standing 100 feet straight up in the air. That's the original elevation of the floor of this valley. That is where Engineer Creek originally ran, 100 feet over our heads. All the overburden here was washed away to expose these gold-bearing gravels. But once the gravels were exposed, they were frozen and they had to be thawed before they could be dredged. You cannot extract placer gold from frozen ground. So right out in front of me here is a cold water thaw field. And the FE company thawed 34,000 acres of gravel very simply by driving these hollow pipes called cold water points straight down into the gravel, circulating water off of the Davidson Ditch. And as that water filtered through the gravel, it would thaw it from surface all the way down to bedrock. So a tremendous amount of time and labor involved in ground preparation. It took an average of 7 years of work to go from an untouched piece of ground to a piece of ground that was stripped of overburden, that was thawed, and that was ready for a dredge to dig for a full 200-day season. And 200 days was FE Company's target, working target for each dredge every year. Now, so much labor involved in ground preparation that at their peak, when they had about 1,000 men on the payroll, 3 times as many men worked in the stripping and thawing fields as actually worked on board one of the dredges. You'll find out shortly the big machines had very small crews. And probably the hardest job on the FE payroll were the men working in the thaw fields. They're called point drivers. 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, point drivers picked up 24-pound sliding hammers, dropped them on clamps to drive that pipe down into the gravel. Imagine doing that 12 hours in a day like today. And for that hard labor, point drivers were compensated at the astounding wage of 33.5 cents per hour. Now, before the first gold dredge went into operation in 1928, and before the FE company had recovered one single speck of gold, that company spent $15 million cash on preparation. That's $15,019,28. That's a tremendous amount of money, and FE was not going to put $15 million into this project without the expectation of realizing a big return on the other end. And I will talk about total gold recovery and return on investment on our trip back to Main Station a little bit later on. But we are coming up on the dredge here. It's going to appear on your right. I encourage you to get some pictures or video as we pull up. It's quite dramatic when it appears. I'm going to hop off the train, catch my breath, and I'll talk to you from on board in just a minute. All right, so now I'm not an English teacher, but tell me if this is irony. Surrounded by water here. I forgot to fill my water bottle, so I'm dying of thirst as I'm standing in front of you. We'll make it to camp. All right, so here is Gold Dredge number 8, one of 8 dredges owned and operated by the Fairbanks Exploration Company between 1928 and 1964. This machine itself in operation 1928 to 1959, last day of work, end of season 59, the dredge stopped right here. It's been sitting on this pond since that day. In operation, this gold dredge was really a simple machine that did 3 things. The gold dredge chewed up gold-bearing gravel, it swallowed gold, it spit out rock. And I'm going to explain those 3 steps to you. And as I do, there'll be some animation up on the screens to illustrate what I'm talking about. So, step 1, chewing up gold-bearing gravel was done by the big bucket line right behind me. The big frame sticking down here is called the ladder. Number 8 had a 35-foot digging ladder, and that means this dredge could cut 35 feet down below water level to reach the pay streak of gold at bedrock. And around the ladder in operation was a continuous chain of 64 6 cubic foot buckets. Some of those big buckets are on the ladder right behind me. In operation, that continuous bucket chain, big chainsaw blade cutting in reverse. That chain of buckets would move around the ladder. Each individual bucket would come up from underneath, dig into the face of the pond out front, scoop up a load of gold-bearing gravel. That full bucket would carry its load up the ladder, drop it into the hopper on the 3rd deck of the dredge, and the empty bucket would go back down to get another load. Number 8 could move 22 buckets per minute when it was digging at top speed. So all that gold-bearing gravel dropped into the hopper, which fed directly down into the trommel. The trommel is a big cylinder, 36 feet long. It's got a 6-foot inside diameter. It starts high at the hopper, slopes down towards the back of the dredge, and that trommel is perforated with holes along its entire length, making it a screen. About a 1/4-inch diameter holes towards the front of the dredge. Holes get bigger as you go back to 1 inch and 5/8. And in operation, that trommel screen rotated. It was like a big rock tumbler moving around and around. So they're banging that gravel around inside the trommel, adding water pumped out of the pond at high pressure at 9,000 gallons per minute. You take the gold-bearing gravel, add water, shake it up in the trommel, that heavy placer gold would separate from sand and rock, sink, fall down through the holes in the screen, and settle onto the sluice boxes on the middle deck of the dredge. Anything bigger than the biggest hole in the screen would slide downhill, fall off the trommel, hit a conveyor belt, be elevated up behind the dredge inside the big stacking arm you see sticking out the back, and that would be spit out into piles of washed rock called tailings. Last pile of tailings deposited by Dredge 8 are just to the left of the cab of the train there. Now anything smaller than the holes in the screen fell through onto the sluice boxes. There are 16 sluices, main sluices on this dredge. There's 8 on each side. They start high at the center of the dredge under the trommel and slope down towards the outside walls. And those sluice boxes were set along their entire length, just like the sluices of the drifters, with riffles. And this is a set of riffles that was used on board the dredge. Riffles, as gold recovery devices, are simply obstructions. On the dredge, as water and sand and small rock and gold flowed through the holes of the trommel, that mixture is called slurry. The slurry was pushed downhill by high pressure water. When that water hit the bar of the riffle, it would create a back current that would pull the heavy gold down to the bottom of the sluice, trap it up against the edge of the next ripple, which would hold on to it, while allowing the lighter sand and rock to simply jump from ripple to ripple. Sand and rock would work their way downhill, eventually out one of the tail sluices behind the dredge back into the pond, while the ripples on board, one by one, filled up with gold. So those are your 3 steps in dredging. Bucket line out front, chewing up gold-bearing gravel, trommel screen and sluice boxes on board, swallowing gold, big stacker in the back, spitting out rocks. The machines ran 24 hours a day during their digging season, but had to be shut down about every 10 to 15 days just for 4 hours to pull cleanup. Cleanup meant removing the gold from the dredge. During that 4-hour shutdown, a special cleanup crew would come on board. They would get up into the sluices and gather up all the material that had built up in between the ripples over that 2-week run. Those are called the concentrates. They would scoop up the concentrates, transport them by truck downtown Fairbanks to the FE company compound. Once there, they went directly to the gold room. The men working in the gold room would open up the door of their big retort furnace, pack the concentrates inside, seal the door, and then bring on the heat up to about 2,400 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to burn off impurities and melt that gold down into liquid form. And once the gold was molten, they would open up the door of the furnace, tip the whole thing forward, and pour that liquid gold into brick molds like this one right here. This is a 700 troy ounce mold. This produced a 58-pound brick of gold. Once the bricks were cool, they would pop them out on the table, clean them up a little bit, and then almost unbelievably, FE company would take each individual 58-pound brick of pure Alaskan gold. They would wrap that brick up in brown paper, they would stick a stamp on it, and they would mail it down to the U.S. Mint in San Francisco. Full cleanup on Dredge 8, about 4,000 ounces of gold recovered every 10 to 15 days. So this is a big machine, and you are welcome to come on board today. Now, obviously, seeing the profile of the dredge, you can see it's tilting towards the back. There's a leak in the hull. Normally, we have pumps running, and that moves enough water to keep the dredge floating. However, level of the pond is up about 3 feet. There is nowhere to pump that water. So the dredge is sitting on the bottom right now. We have flooding on the main deck, but you can get on board the second and third decks, and I will be right at the entrance to the dredge to help everyone get up stairs safely. If you come on board, and I encourage you to do so, you will see a big machine, 1,064 tons of dredge, but the big machine had a small crew. 6 men kept this dredge digging 24 hours a day on 2 12-hour shifts. You had to hop from here. It's a quick trip into main camp, and when you exit the train there, crew's going to meet you, hand you one of these. This is a poke sack full of concentrates, just like the concentrates that built up on the dredge. These are from a gold mine just up the valley from us. You'll see the pans all set out for you, undercover, nice and dry. Have a seat, empty the entire contents of the poke into the pan. And like everything else, this poke is wet, so I'm going to give it a good shake. And then just set the poke aside, we'll pick it up for you. Now, if you cannot see one of us directly, I am also up on screen there on the train. Okay, so step 1 in panning is to dip that pan in the water, get enough water to cover up that gravel, and just like the trommel on the dredge, you got to shake this material up, get it nice and loose so that heavy placer gold can separate from the sand and the rock. And then, just like it did on the dredge, what's going to happen to that gold? It's going to sink, but only if you get this nice and loose. You cannot just swish water back and forth. That doesn't do anything. You have to hear the rocks grinding on the bottom of that pan. So you hear that grinding, that means everything's nice and loose. You then want to carefully start to tip the pan away from you, move all that gravel from the bottom of the pan right up to the edge. Now we're going to stop shaking, pour off the water, and show you this angle. The entire time that you are actively panning, you need to keep your pan at this angle. You never pan flat. When we shook everything flat in step one, that gold sank to the bottom of the pan. As we moved that gravel forward, that gold slid along the bottom of the pan. It is now caught in this little crease. That's what's going to hold on to the gold for you, but only if you keep your pan at an angle. You never pan flat. You can do a simple test. See if you're doing this right. You put your hand on the bottom of the pan, you are touching metal. There is no sand or rock on the bottom of that pan. Okay, so at that angle, we now take on water, and again, like the trommel, a little shake will set that heavy gold into the crease. That shaking will also lift light sand and rock to the surface. Next step, stop shaking, pour off the water, holding your pan at that angle in one motion. You dip underwater and lift right back up. And you will see the top layer of light sand and rock that you shook to the surface just wash and rinse right out of the pan. You dip and lift without changing the angle of the pan. So you dip it 5 or 6 times, get some material moving, then take on water, again holding the angle. A little shake will set the gold in the crease. Then stop and pour, hold the angle, and dip and lift. Every time you lift your pan out of the water, you should see a little bit of sand and rock leave. If nothing is leaving that pan, you have to increase your angle a bit. You cannot be afraid to let the sand and the rock go. Now, if you have any big rocks that start to build up on the surface that are not moving, they can cause problems later on. So big rocks that aren't moving, just pick them off the surface and get them out. Don't dig around looking for little rocks. Water will take care of those. Big rocks only. Take on water, again, shake, set the gold in the crease, stop and pour, hold the angle, and dip and lift. You let the water do the work for you. You move the pan, the water creates a wave that rinses that top layer right out. Now we know that everyone wants to get down to their gold. Okay, some of you have been waiting a lifetime to be here, literally, right? I mean, we know that, and big kids and little kids alike. But you have to be patient. Okay, if you get impatient and you physically shake sand and rock out of this pan, things will go much quicker. You will also shake the gold right to the bottom of the trough and lose it. You cannot shake anything out of the pan. Shaking is only to set the gold in the crease. And then you stop and pour, hold the angle, and let the water do the work for you. And you continue these steps until you get down to just about a spoonful of material. And when you get down here, you'll see mostly sand and a few small rocks in the pan. Here we are done actively panning, and we're ready for cleanup. We're ready to find the gold. So for the last step, you can take on water. Because we are not actively panning, no dipping and lifting, you can flatten your pan out for this last step. And then using the water in the pan, you very gently swirl it over the sand and just push the sand to the side. Just enough water pressure to move the sand. And as that sand moves, you will start to see what the old timers here called a flash in the pan. That's going to be your gold, and when you see the gold, there's no mistaking it. Gold stays put, sand moves, you rinse out the sand, and you got nice clean gold. Now, if you do the last step and there's no gold in your pan, doesn't happen often, but if it does, let us know. We'll get you another poke and we'll help you start again from the beginning. But if you do all that work and there is no gold in your pan, you can say to yourself, probably for the first time in your life, literally, are you ready for this? It just didn't pan out. Oh. If you're groaning, that means no gold for you. All right, how about a hand for the crew showing their skills with the gold bands? Tyler Oliver, Danny Quinn. We'll see them down at camp. Okay, now to get the gold out of the pan, probably the hardest thing you're going to do today. You will have a film container next to you when you sit down. When your gold is nice and clean, pop the lid of the container, put it in the pan, somehow try to get a dry finger, and if you press on the gold with a dry finger, it will stick right on your fingertip. You tap it off in the container, and then you're all set. All right, so Josh is going to bring us around this dredge into main camp, and we're going to pass right around the back of the machine. Submerged right now, that discharged sand and water back into the pond. You'll see the big anchor spuds that held the dredge down while it was digging, and you will see probably the single most important part of this dredge, at least for the men working on board, and that is the outhouse, mounted right there in the bottom of the steps, in between the anchor spud and the now almost fully submerged tail sluice. So underneath the stacker, just barely to go, and into main camp. Again, when you exit the train, the crew will meet you. They will hand you your boat. You head undercover into the panning shed, and you're ready to get to work. Any questions or problems, let us know. We got the hardest working crew in Fox, and the crew is here to help you out. Once you have that gold in your pan, that is yours to keep. You can bring it inside the main camp. The crew in there can weigh it up for you on the scales. They can tell you how much you got and what it's worth. And gold trading at 9 o'clock this morning, up substantially from yesterday at $2,415 an ounce. Crew inside can also make a piece of fine jewelry right there for you using the gold to pan here at dredge number 8. Inside on display at the gold counter is a 19-ounce gold nugget. It's a $75,000 plus piece of placer gold. You're welcome to pick it up. You can feel the weight of that metal in your hand. That one you cannot take home with you, but you get a nice picture with it. Lot to see inside and out. Again, I will be on board the deck, on board the dredge after panning to direct you up to the second and third deck safely. Please do a final check around you. Don't leave anything on board this train. A lot of time in camp. And again, we're the only train here, but boarding calls will be for Beaver Creek. And once we come to a complete stop on this long train, and here we are, go ahead, open those doors on you.
Gonna shape an angle. That angle is what helps put the gold at the very bottom of that pan. Give you that gold back. It's yours to keep.
I know, that's what I said. Yeah.
That's you.
No, that's Star Wars.
Moose on the loose. Alaska baseball, socks. Feed the bears, let your kids ride the moose, go without mosquito repellent, swan dive on a cruise ship, catch halibut from a rowboat. Accounting and purchasing. Oh, here's where we weigh the gold.
Mom's gonna have a lot.
He wants to do his fool's gold. Right? You can tell it
19-ounce nugget.
very similar.
It's worth $75,000.
The best way to differentiate between real gold and iron pyrite.
Heavy.
If you look at some of the structures here, you can tell they have. You see, it's glowing off those sharp edges.
Right.
On the flat surface. Gold, as you may know, is very malleable. So very, very soft. So gold, when it comes out of the ground, is never going to have a flat edge. It's never going to be crisp.
Right, how about a round of applause for your All-Alaska Gold Dredge Day? And today's a good day. Half days on Thursdays, so we're going to clean this up and everybody's got the afternoon off. All right, so on this return trip, we're going to talk about recovery and shutdown, a little bit about modern mining and the future here. So Gold Dredge number 8 in 26 seasons of operation recovered just about 600,000 ounces of gold. The entire fleet of 8 FE dredges combined in 34 seasons recovered just over 3.6 million ounces of gold, worth at that time $125 million. So the FE company definitely made their initial $15 million investment back, plus quite a bit more. So the question then is, if they're recovering so much gold, why did the FE company stop dredging? Almost the entire time the company was in operation here, the price of gold in the United States was fixed at $35 an ounce, and the only authorized buyer of gold in the United States was the federal government. So every ounce of gold recovered by the dredges sold directly to the United States Mint for $35. And that $35 an ounce price was the reason for shutdown. By the late 1950s and early 60s, the cost of operating the dredges overtook the price of gold. There was no profit left in it, so the FE company turned the machines off, walked away from them, and number 8's been sitting on its pond here since its last day of work, end of season 1959. So the gold did not run out of the ground, the profit ran out of the gold for the FE company and their dredges. So as that dredging era ended, that was not the end of gold mining. Small-scale placer miners continued to work their claims. They are still working today. There are active gold mines on a small scale all around us here in the Gold Stream Valley. So still a very common seasonal economic activity. And then 10 miles up the highway from us is the largest active gold mine in the state of Alaska. And that mine is called, very appropriately, the Fort Knox Gold Mine. And the Fort Knox mine is owned by Kinross, the Canadian multinational mining corporation, and it's a hard rock mine. So the gold there is still embedded inside of its original lode source. To get to it, there's a big open pit, half a mile deep, a mile wide. Every morning, crews detonate explosives in the floor of that pit to break up the gold-bearing rock. Big dump trucks, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, move the rock up out of the pit to the mill. It's run through a series of crushers, reduced down into a powder, which is run through a chemical process to extract gold. And the end result at the Fort Knox mine is about 1,000 ounces of gold recovered every 24 hours. So 1,000 ounces a day, 365 days a year, $2,300 an ounce right now. All that math equals big money coming up out of the ground every day up at the Fort Knox mine. So gold here in Fairbanks is our past. The reason for the founding of this town was Felix Pedro's strike, July 22nd, 1902. We are rolling across historic mining ground right now. The little creek we're paralleling again here, Engineer Creek, claims on that creek gave up 96,000 ounces of placer gold to the underground drifters between 1907 and 1910. So gold is our past. Gold is part of our present, and we have more gold in our future. I was lucky enough to get up to the Fort Knox mine at the beginning of this summer, saw them in the midst of a major expansion. And then about 75 miles north of us, outside of a little tiny town called Livengood, a piece of ground there controlled by another big company called Tower Hill. And on a 75-acre group of claims, Tower Hill geologists have proven in the ground with their test drilling 13 million ounces of gold. And as that mine is developed, and that gold starts to come out of the ground, that's going to bring a valuable mineral up into the modern world in many ways, and that mine is going to stimulate the economy of the Fairbanks area for many, many years to come. So, as we get set here to cross Engineer Creek for the last time and approach Main Station, and you'll see a lot of water on the lower part of the creek here, I can sum up this whole trip that we just took together around the tracks this morning. I know it's a lot of information, sometimes a little bit overwhelming, but here is what you have to remember. In Fairbanks, Alaska, we have a golden past. We are living right now in a golden present, and we look forward to a golden future as well. And that one I made up all by myself. That's pretty good, huh? Right, and that's perfect timing as always. We are right back at the main station. My time to thank you for your visit on behalf of Josh, your engineer, and your crew down in camp. Our job, rain or shine, to make sure that you guys have a great time while you're with us. I hope you notice I make an extraordinary effort every time I start a trip to entertain and inform you to the best of my ability. I want this trip to be the highlight of your time in Fairbanks. I hope it was that for you. You guys want to wait until the train comes to a complete stop. After the train is stopped, you're going to exit to your left. I'm going to run up front, make sure the path is clear for you. I will shake as many hands as I can up there, but if I don't see you up front, thanks for coming out. Enjoy the rest of your day in Fairbanks. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye.
Oh, yeah. Here we are, back where we started. That's the pipeline.
How big an ounce is? An ounce is probably